Hello, I am here to start this video and I'm going to blow you guys' mind with Sarah Angarita. She is a full-time real estate investor and also a real estate agent with Align Real Estate. And she wrote me an offer that blew my mind. And I was like, what? What is this? So it's super good idea to do it now because interest rates are so high. So there are ways that your offer could get accepted, especially if you're an investor and you're looking for deals. So let's talk about that.
Yeah, absolutely. So, with the way that rates have risen since May, it's really changed the game, especially for investors, right? Because a lot of times we're mainly looking for the return on investment. We're looking for cash flow, and those two things are getting knocked off by interest rates.
Correct.
So if we buy in and it's a 7% interest rate minimum, really we're going to be landing 7 to 10%. That knocks down our cash flow and the viability for us to be able to buy more properties.
Correct.
So that's where we've really got to start thinking outside the box, get creative, and come up with some offers. Like what I said.
Yeah, and it sounds, when you start talking about it, it sounds so confusing. But we are here to just show investors out there that it's not that confusing. It can be done.
Right. Absolutely. So it seems really complicated just because it's not something that most people are familiar with. And most people tend to shy away from things that they don't understand.
Yeah.
And so one thing is you're going to mainly have an attorney write up all of your paperwork.
Okay.
So that you don't have to understand every single intricacy of how it all works. But the basics are, it's seller financing.
Okay.
And traditional seller financing is when they've paid off the home completely. They own it outright.
Okay.
And so then they become the bank and they're financing that property for you, ideally at a lower interest rate than what the market is offering right now.
Okay. So is that a set? For example, right now, investors are at 8%. So if you're doing seller financing, it is like 1% less, 2% less. Is that like a number that investors like to have?
The lower the better. So you've got a few different factors that you can play with, and the primary ones are going to be your down payment, your interest rate, or ideally what they're looking for is principal only payments.
Okay.
So that you structure interest either at the front end and work it into the purchase price, or you work it into the back end of the loan. And the reason that we do that is it actually benefits the seller as well, because let's say that we were to do 6% interest and they're getting those monthly payments, they actually have to pay a higher tax on those payments because that's going to be perceived as income tax. So if they're in a high tax bracket, it might be something like 30%. Whereas if we work it into the purchase price or push it to the end of the term, at the end of the balloon, their rate may be only 15% on the taxes that they would have to pay because it's perceived as capital gains.
Okay.
So there's no really set standard. It's all negotiable. But if somebody wants a high down payment, they've got to work with the buyer on if the seller wants a really high down payment, then they've got to be able to work with the buyer on that interest rate.
Okay.
Or if they want a high purchase price, they've got to work on the down payment, or you just
because I feel that sellers want, if they're doing owner financing, they want some skin in the game. So let's say, you're giving the example of a $500,000 home. So let's just be very on it. Right. So a $500,000 home, let's say the buyer is going to put 20% down, which is $100,000. And then the rest is going to be financing in a balloon.
Yes. So, well, you can do it different ways. A lot of times the seller doesn't want to wait 30 years for their money. So you can do a balloon, something like a 10-year balloon.
Okay.
So that you're making monthly payments that are amortized over 30 years. But they actually get their lump sum, whatever's left over after that 10-year span of time.
Okay. And if at some point the buyer decides, okay, now interest rates are 3% again. So can the buyer apply, the buyer can get a traditional mortgage and then pay off the owner.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. So if rates were to dip before that term was up, there's no penalty for the buyer to go and get financing. It actually benefits the seller for them to pay that off sooner.
So let's say if in a $500,000, you put $100,000 down and you do a 7% interest rate. So your payment buyer is going to be for 10 years to the seller. 10 years, your loan is due in full. Okay. Correct. And then in that point, the buyer is going to get financing outside with the bank to be able to do that.
Correct.
Okay. Yeah. Então, for example, let's say can you do like interest rate? Because I heard about doing interest rates only for the first 2 years. And then have you heard about that too?
Yes.
Okay. That would be more beneficial to the seller than to the buyer to do interest rate only for like a year or two.
So that's definitely an option. Okay. That would obviously only benefit the seller.
Yeah.
And that's not
because the tire place makes a lot of money.
Right.
So I would have cash flow for the buyer at that particular.
Right.
You know?
It depends on every situation is different, and what the investor is looking for is different. Like for us, that's not an ideal situation because when you have that balloon, you've got to pay that lump sum at the end. As the buyer, you want to make sure that you've built in your equity over that time so that, let's say that rates are still at 7% at the end of that balloon. Your other exit strategy would be to sell it to someone else.
Correct.
So if you don't have the equity, it puts you in a tight spot to be able to pay that. So it actually benefits the seller and the buyer to guarantee that you've got the equity to pay off that.
Okay. Yeah. So I think that's important for us to know too. So, okay, you're doing a seller financing and in 10 years, you're going to have to pay that property off. Correct. If our interest rates are even higher than today, because we don't know what's going to happen in the future. Right. So the two ways that you can get out of this is getting a traditional financing with a bank to pay off the seller or selling that property to someone else.
Correct.
Okay.
And there's you could turn around and seller finance it to someone else as well. There's other ways that you can work it, but you want to make sure that you're protecting yourself and the seller throughout that process. And that's where you consult with an attorney to make sure everything's really crisp and clean.
Okay. So another question that I have that I think people out there are going to have is, my mortgage is not assumable. So I cannot, do a seller financing if I still own money in this property. Right. So how do we deal with that? Because that's what happens to our deal, right? That we're trying to do.
So that actually happens a lot. And there's a lot of misconceptions around this, but it's actually called a subject to. And what that is basically you would assume or take over the payments on the seller's mortgage, and you would pay that either directly or ideally through a licensed servicing company would pay that, just so that it's on record. You're protected as the buyer, they're protected as the seller.
Okay. That their mortgage is getting paid.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct.
Okay.
So it's definitely an option, and it's available to people out there.
So how about if you say, okay, I cannot pay this anymore, and the seller is financing, and now the seller has to pay that mortgage? Right. So is there ways that we can protect the seller as well?
Absolutely. Okay. Absolutely. So it actually works in the favor of the seller if the buyer defaults, because depending on how you write up your paperwork, you want to make sure to write in there that if the buyer was to default, that after X amount of time of not paying, the seller gets to keep all the money, all the payments that I've made. They get to keep any improvements to the property, and they get the house back. Okay. So it actually benefits them because they get
that is no brainer. Yeah. The only thing I see is, for example, if this seller wants to buy another house and his debt to ratio is high. So if that loan is not getting paid off, how does that seller is able to buy another property?
Right. So that goes back to having a licensed servicing company. So because you're actually recording all of those payments, that seller is now able to go and show that to their next lender to prove that they can wipe off that debt. Okay. It cleans out their debt to income ratio because they're making the money from that property. Okay. They don't actually owe and have to pay that amount.
Okay, yeah. So people are very uncomfortable with seller financing.
Right.
Right.
And it's because of that unfamiliarity to it.
Yeah. So let's structure a deal right now so people can see it. Okay.
Yeah.
So I have $1 million property or
Mm-hmm.
$500,000 property, whatever
Mhm.
number you prefer. Like,
Okay.
did you have anything already done with numbers or no?
So just to put an example for what it would be with traditional financing, I have it 500,000.
Okay, so let's do the 500.
Okay.
All right. So the property is $500,000, and on a traditional financing, and then on a seller financing.
Mhm.
So let's give out there those two scenarios.
Okay. So back in May, if you were to buy a property at $500,000 with the interest rates back then, and then you take everything being equal, but you just change the interest rates to now, same $500,000 property, same down payment. It was an increase of $1,000 a month on the buyer's monthly payment. And so that would put it around $3,000.
Okay.
But let's run the math on, assuming you were able to do principal only payments.
Okay.
On a $500,000 property, your monthly payment without insurance and taxes would only be $1,388 a month.
Okay.
So from $3,000 to $30,000, it opens up for investors the ability to cash flow that property, for that to be a good investment, for it to pay itself back, for you to build equity over time, and so you're still able to invest and buy properties despite interest rates.
Okay.
Or for a regular buyer, it works for them because now it's more affordable. You're reaching a whole new category of buyer.
Okay.
So it really works not only for investors but for potential buyers as well.
So this is kind of the buy down, because you can reduce your interest rate on a traditional mortgage with the buy down rate, right? So it's kind of the same idea, but using a seller financing.
Correct.
Yeah, I think
the
more.
only downside about that is the adjustable rate. So it's going to adjust over time. Usually, you're only locked in, like the 3-2-1 buy down. You're only locked in for 3 years.
3 years, yeah.
So in our economic conditions, our rate's going to go back down to what they were, or lower than what they are now in 3 years. We don't know. So there's still a little bit of risk there.
Okay.
For the buyer.
Okay. So what are the advantages of a seller accepting a seller financing? Tell me pros and cons.
Okay. So some of the advantages are, one, they're going to get tax benefits. So if they sell their property for that high dollar right now, they're going to have to pay capital gains tax all at once on that. Whereas if you spread it out over those monthly payments, they're paying capital gains in small increments over time. So that's one benefit. Another benefit is that they're actually able to get a higher purchase price, because going back to the numbers that we just did, even if we raise the purchase price from $500,000 to $600,000, it's only going to affect those monthly payments by a couple $100s a month.
Correct.
So the buyer can actually afford to pay that higher purchase price than what the market is going to bear. Right
Okay.
now. So that's a huge benefit if you're, especially for sellers that really want to get a high price, or they're stuck on that price that they need for their home.
Okay.
They get monthly payments every month, so it's passive income. There's a lot of different benefits.
But those are really good.
Right.
Yeah. Because it's important to open the seller's mind too, because they're very, especially here in Brevard County, I feel that they're very closed for that idea.
Right.
We don't see, like, I've been in real estate for 10 years. I never did a seller financing deal.
Right.
And I do more residential. I get it. And interest rates have been really good. So I think now that the interest rates are high, that's when we have to adapt and adapt it fast, because, otherwise you die, right? If you don't adapt fast, you die.
Absolutely. You got to get creative.
Yeah.
And it's set up in a way that it can actually benefit the seller and the buyer. For the buyer, it lowers their closing costs. It keeps the money, basically it keeps most of the money between the buyer and the seller.
Correct.
Rather than paying it out to other people.
Yeah.
So you're able to, as the buyer, give more of that money to the seller. So,
okay.
Yeah.
Very good. Do you have anything else in mind that you think that is a really good point that we can put it out there for even sellers to open their mind about owner financing, or about buyers that are looking for investment properties and don't know about this, and now they do? Besides calling me to go look for a house.
Right. Exactly. Definitely talk with somebody who's experienced in this category. Because If you just go to any lender, to any bank, any title company,
Yeah.
if they haven't dealt with this before,
They're going to say you can't do that.
They're going to say no. They're going to say that's illegal. You can't do that. They're going to give you all of these things that are actually not factual. They're going to say things like, well, the buyer just can't afford to buy that house, or they just don't have good credit.
Yeah.
But the reality is, as an investment anyways, the house just doesn't make sense financially to buy any other way.
Okay.
Unless you significantly lower the purchase price.
Correct. Correct. Because investors are looking for cash flow and ROI, and that's
equity.
a way that, okay, cool.
Yeah.
I love it.
Definitely. And
thank you.
Check with attorneys.
Yeah.
Make sure if you're going to pursue something like this that you're doing your paperwork properly. You're double checking everything with an attorney to make sure it's crisp, clean.
And then the attorney fee is part of the closing costs. Is instead of paying a lender almost 3% of your purchase price,
right?
As closing costs. So it's even, you have a lawyer, it's even lower closing costs, and you can get, more money for your house doing that way. If you're a seller and if you're a buyer, it would make sense for cash flow and ROI.
Yeah, absolutely.
Cool. I like
Definitely.
it. Thank you.
Absolutely.
We need to do some deals together.
We will.
If I have investors, for sure.
Yeah.
Because then we can get very creative on the offers.
Right.
To make it work.
And it's funny because typically higher priced properties and land are the two areas that you're going to see more seller financing.
Yeah. Yeah. Land, we see it.
Right.
Yeah, it's more, I think is more popular.
Yes.
But for investment in residential, I don't see it a lot.
Right. I think we're going to start to see it a lot more, especially if sellers are motivated and actually want to sell their house.
Yes.
And sell it for that high dollar that they would have gotten 6 months ago. Because I think a lot of sellers don't want to hear that their house isn't worth that anymore.
Correct.
And it's no fun to have to tell them that.
Yeah.
But it's our job to be trusted advisors. And the most important part of that is our honesty.
Yeah.
So being transparent and just
And we have no control of the market.
Right.
The market's the market. And the numbers are the numbers. I tell all the time, sellers need to stop saying, but I feel that my house, I'm sorry, but your feeling does not set the market value. Your feeling is just your feeling. I'm sorry.
Right.
But and I know
true.
we love the house. We have a connection with the house. We think it's worth more than what it is.
Right.
But reality is reality.
It's true. And maybe when the market cycles back, it will be worth that.
Correct.
But you have to live in the present moment, in the present market.
Yeah.
Put yourself in the shoes of the buyer.
Yeah.
A lot of times I see a disconnect between it's a buyer's market, it's a seller's market, or even in transactions, we're representing the seller or the buyer. There's this separation. But I think if you, as the seller, put yourself in the shoes of the buyer, you'll start to see why they're structuring deals differently, or where they're at with it. And same for the buyer. Right? You want to structure a deal that works for your seller. Because you can't have a transaction without one or the other. Yeah. So they have to have a
meeting of the minds for sure.
Yeah.
And I always use that too. I said, okay, if you were the buyer, like right now you're selling this house because you're gonna buy another one, would you do this? Sometimes they go, no. I said, well.
Right. And it depends. This particular strategy, if they need that liquid cash out to go and spend on something else, it probably won't work.
Yeah.
Depending on the down payment and how you structure the deal.
Correct.
But in other situations, it might be a great fit, especially if they want to collect some monthly income, residual income, get some tax benefits, things like that.
Cool. Well, thank you so much.
Absolutely.
I love that.
Thank you. Definitely look forward to working with you more.
Yes, for sure.